The morning after Damien left, the house carried a stillness I hadn't felt in years. No footsteps on the stairs, no low hum of his voice from the kitchen, no clatter of keys tossed onto the counter, just the soft tick of the grandfather clock in the hall and the rustle of leaves brushing against the window. For the first time in a long while, the quiet felt like a gift. I made coffee and sat at the table by the window, letting the steam rise into my face. My son had flown out the night before. Some business trip he said was important, though the details were vague. He promised to be gone less than a week, and I had nodded, pretending it mattered to me either way. In truth, the pause in his presence felt like air after a suffocating stretch. I had no obligations to anyone but myself for the next few days, and I intended to use the time wisely. My eyes drifted to the small white door tucked beneath the staircase in the front hall. That space had always been a nuisance, a catch-all for junk, boxes, and forgotten things. Damien had insisted on fixing it months ago, patching the trim and tightening the hinges. He was meticulous, almost obsessive with details, which was why the thought of that little door unsettled me now. It had been on my to-do list for months, but I had always found reasons to avoid it, carrying my coffee with me. I crouched to open the door. Dust met me first, a stale breath of neglect. I pushed aside an old vacuum and a stack of Christmas lights, making a mental note to throw most of it away. Then I saw it, one plank of wood, slightly out of line with the others, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. My hand froze. Damien would never have left something crooked. Not him. I set the mug down carefully, the liquid sloshing near the rim. Kneeling closer, I touched the edge of the board. It shifted under my fingers, loose, like it wasn't meant to be part of the floor at all. My pulse quickened. I drew in a slow breath, my hand hovering just above the plank, knowing that once I lifted it, whatever lay beneath would not let me go. The wood lifted with a groan, and beneath it lay a hollow, no larger than a shoebox. Nestled inside was a dull gray lockbox, its surface cold against my palms as I pulled it free. My pulse hammered in my ears. Damien had built these stairs with his own hands. Why would he hide something here? I carried it to the kitchen table, brushing dust from its lid. The combination dial glared back at me, daring me to try. My fingers shook as I spun the wheel. Our wedding anniversary. Nothing. Damien's graduation date. Still locked. I leaned back, exhaling, then tried the one number that had been etched into my memory from the day I first held him, his birthday. The mechanism clicked with a sharp finality that sent shivers down my spine. The lid creaked open, and inside lay neat stacks of papers, each page folded with an order that reminded me of Damien's relentless precision. At first, I thought they might be work documents, but then my name leapt out at me in bold print. Evelina Calloway. I scanned the first page, my vision blurring. Admission forms for a residential care facility, a medical assessment draft, unsigned but already typed out, claiming diminished capacity. Behind it, a prepared power of attorney granting Damien full control of my assets. Another packet detailed the transfer of my house into his name. My hand flew to my mouth. The room tilted. I pushed the papers away, but the words burned into me. Impossible to unsee. My son, my only child, had laid out a future where I was locked away, silenced, erased from the life I had built. I staggered back from the table, clutching the chair for balance, as if the very ground beneath me had betrayed me. The silence of the house no longer felt like peace. It felt like a trap closing in, and in that stillness, the truth settled heavy in my chest. Damien wasn't just planning for my care. He was planning for my disappearance. I sank into the nearest chair. The papers still spread across the table like a map of betrayal. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. And somewhere in the silence of the house, the echo of another abandonment stirred. When Damien was 7, his father left us. I still remember the night he walked out the slammed door, the muffled argument that had carried through thin walls, and the shame of whispers that followed in the small Virginia town we lived in. He hadn't died. He had chosen someone else. Another woman, another life. I told myself I was strong enough to raise Damien alone, that I would be both father and mother, protector and provider. So I worked. 2 jobs, sometimes 3. Days at the diner, nights cleaning offices, weekends tailoring clothes. My body ached. My hands cracked from detergent and bleach, but I never let Damien see me break. I made sure he had the newest school supplies, that he could join field trips, that he would never feel the lack I felt each night when I returned to an empty bed. I denied myself everything that wasn't essential. Dresses I loved stayed on store racks. Vacations existed only in the magazines I shelved between clients. I gave him all I had: my time, my strength, my very youth. I used to whisper to myself that as long as he knew he was loved, none of it would be wasted. And now, staring at these papers, I felt the cruelty of irony cut deeper than any blade. My husband had walked away to build a life without me. And my son, the very reason I survived those years, was plotting to lock me away, to strip my name from the home I fought to keep. The betrayal wasn't just his. It was history repeating, as though love itself was never enough to keep a man faithful to me. The chair creaked as I pushed myself up, the weight of 2 abandonments pressing on my chest, and I forced my eyes back to the documents that promised a future I would not allow. I forced myself to sit back down and gather the papers into a single stack. The initial shock had nearly undone me, but now I needed to read, not skim, not glance, truly read what Damien had planned. The first page bore the letterhead of a law office in Richmond. Polite and professional, it outlined procedures for establishing guardianship over a family member whose judgment may be impaired. My name was typed neatly in the first paragraph, as though I were already incapable of understanding my own life. My chest tightened as I traced the cold language that reduced me to a case number. Behind it was a medical assessment draft, half filled with notes I had never given, forgetful at times. One line read, "Difficulty managing household tasks. Lies," written as though they were observations. Damien must have been gathering these with help, someone feeding him the words he'd need to build his case. At the bottom of one draft page was a faint pencil note in handwriting that wasn't his. "Talk to Marissa about timing." His wife. My stomach churned. It wasn't just Damien. She was part of this too. Together they had discussed my future like it was a piece of furniture to be moved. I read further, each document slicing deeper, a draft power of attorney with Damien's name typed neatly under the line that would strip me of authority. An asset transfer that placed my house and accounts in his control. Every page was prepared, waiting only for signatures and the push of a legal stamp. I stood abruptly, papers trembling in my hands. Rage threatened to spill over, but I forced it down, steadying myself. If I wanted to survive this, I had to be calm. I had to be smarter than him. Pulling out the old printer from the hallway desk, I copied every page. Each sheet slid into a manila folder I labeled with nothing but a single letter E. I returned the originals to the box, lowered the plank back into place, and closed the little white door under the stairs, as if sealing away a ghost. The folder I carried upstairs was heavier than paper had any right to be. I set it in the back of my closet. locked behind cedar and steel, and sat on the edge of my bed, knowing the question wasn't whether Damien would act. It was when. The phone rang just after sunset, its sharp tone cutting through the stillness of the house. Damien's name lit up the screen, and for a moment I considered letting it ring out. But I pressed the green button, steadying my breath as his voice came through, warm and practiced. "Hi, Mom. How are you holding up?" His tone was casual, even affectionate, the kind any son might use while away. Yet beneath it, I heard something else now, a thin wire of calculation I had never noticed before. "I'm fine," I said softly. "Just keeping busy around the house." He chuckled. "That place keeps you on your toes, doesn't it? It's a lot for one person. Sometimes I wonder if you'd be happier somewhere. Easier." The words slid out smoothly, coated in concern, but I heard them for what they were. A test, a seed planted. My heart thudded, but I forced a laugh. "Oh, you know me. I need my projects." There was a pause on his end, as if he were measuring my response. Then he continued, "I just worry about you. Mom, future security. You know what happens when you don't feel like handling it all anymore. What if you need more care?" I gripped the phone tighter, nails pressing into my palm. He sounded so tender, but the documents in my closet told me exactly what those words meant. He wasn't speaking of care. He was rehearsing control. "I appreciate that you think of me," I replied, keeping my tone light. "But for now, I'm doing just fine." "Of course," he said quickly, almost too quickly. "I just want you comfortable, that's all. We'll talk more when I'm back." We exchanged a few more pleasantries, his voice smooth, mine steady, until at last the call ended. I lowered the phone slowly, staring at the darkened screen. My hand was trembling, the knuckles blanched white from how tightly I'd held it. The silence after the call felt heavier than his words had been. He was already preparing me for the story he wanted me to believe, and I had to decide whether to confront the lie now or let him walk deeper into his own trap. The next morning, I drove into town with the manila folder tucked safely in my bag. My hands shook on the steering wheel, but my mind was clear. If Damien thought he could strip me of my life, he had underestimated me. I wasn't going to wait for him to make the first move. I parked outside a brick office near the courthouse, the name Carter and Wills painted on the glass. Years ago, one of my closest friends from church, Marianne, had left to study law. I hadn't seen her in years, but I remembered her steady way of listening, her sharp mind even as a girl. I hoped she hadn't changed. She welcomed me into her office, surprise flashing across her face, then concern as she saw the tension I carried. "Evelina, what brings you here?" I closed the door and laid the folder on her desk. My voice was steady, though my throat ached. I need to know how to protect myself from my own son. Marianne's brows knit as she read, page by page. Her frown deepened when she finally looked up. Her eyes were both sympathetic and firm. "He's preparing to declare you incompetent, but there are steps you can take. We'll establish a living trust in your name, one that no one can access without your consent. We'll also set medical directives to block any false claims about your health. He won't be able to touch your assets." Her words steadied me. Piece by piece, for the first time since finding that box, I felt my footing return. We spent hours drafting papers, her hand guiding mine across forms that turned fear into action. When I left, I carried not only copies of legal shields, but the quiet fire of someone who refuses to be erased. That evening, back home, I opened my laptop and glanced at social media. Damien's wife had posted a photo of herself smiling beside a realtor's sign. The caption, "Excited for bigger spaces soon." My stomach turned. They were already counting my home as theirs. I shut the laptop with a decisive snap. If they thought I was too blind to see, they were about to learn I had sharper eyes than either of them imagined. When Damien came back from his trip, I invited him over for dinner. I told myself it was to keep up appearances, but deep down, I wanted to see him face to face, to study him with the knowledge I now carried. I cooked his favorite roast chicken, set the table as if nothing had changed, and greeted him at the door with a smile I had rehearsed in the mirror. He kissed my cheek, warm and easy, as though he hadn't been plotting my erasure while away. I forced myself not to flinch. We ate slowly, the conversation light his meetings, the weather, idle talk about the neighborhood. I waited, patient as a cat in tall grass. It came after dessert, just as I expected. He set down his fork, folded his hands, and leaned forward with that practiced expression of concern. Mom, have you ever thought about simplifying your life? Maybe moving somewhere with a little more assistance? A place where things are taken care of for you. My pulse throbbed in my throat. But I kept my smile soft. That's thoughtful. Damien, you always want the best for me. His shoulders relaxed, but I pressed the point, tilting my head. Speaking of simplifying, how are you and Marissa managing financially? I imagine that new house you mentioned must be expensive. A flicker crossed his face. So quick, most people would miss it. His fingers drummed against the table before he caught himself. We're fine. Mom, just planning ahead. That's all. I nodded, feigning acceptance, though inside I burned. Every word confirmed the plan already outlined in those hidden papers. He thought he was easing me toward surrender, when in truth I was measuring just how far he was willing to go. When he finally left, thanking me for the meal, I shut the door gently behind him. My smile vanished the moment the latch clicked. The air inside the house was heavy again, but I held myself still, saving the fury for the moment it would matter most. 2 weeks later, Damien arrived at my house with a smile too wide to be genuine. He carried a folder under his arm and told me he had arranged a quick meeting with a notary, just to take care of some simple paperwork. His voice was smooth, coaxing, like he was asking me to sign for a package rather than the rest of my life. I let my shoulders sag and feigned weariness. If you think it's necessary. Damien, I trust you. The lie tasted bitter, but I said it with all the frailty he expected. The office was small, beige walls lined with certificates, the notary polite but distant. Damien guided me to the chair, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. As if reassuring a fragile woman who couldn't manage on her own, the gesture made my skin crawl. He laid the papers in front of me, each one carrying the weight of his betrayal. I picked up the pen, let it hover, then set it down. My eyes met his. Before I sign anything, I think we should review a few documents of my own. Confusion flickered across his face. I reached into my bag and slid a folder onto the table, the copies I had made. His name, his notes. Every step of the plan laid bare. His eyes widened, the blood draining from his cheeks. The door opened quietly behind him, and Marianne stepped in, her briefcase in hand. I'll be representing Mrs. Calloway from here on, she said smoothly. Damien's mouth opened, then shut. He looked from me to the lawyer to the notary, panic setting into his polished facade. The mask cracked, and for the first time I saw not a confident son, but a cornered man, caught in his own scheme. I folded my hands calmly on the table. This ends today. Damien. The silence that followed was thicker than any words he could muster, and in it, I felt the balance shift entirely into my hands. The storm broke the moment we stepped back inside the house. Damien slammed the door so hard the frame rattled, his voice rising before I had even taken off my coat. You've destroyed everything," he shouted, pacing like a trapped animal. "Do you have any idea what you've done? That was my future. You've ruined it." I watched him, the son I once cradled in sleepless nights, now spitting venom across the same walls I had built to protect him. His face was twisted with fury, veins tight against his skin. But beneath the anger, I saw what had always been there: fear, weakness, and the hunger of a man who had convinced himself that taking from his mother was survival. "I didn't ruin your future," I said quietly, my voice steady in the storm. "You did. The moment you decided my life was yours to claim." He froze, his mouth opening, closing, then curling again into bitterness. "I did it for us, for stability." "You don't understand." I cut him off with a single glance. "No, Damien, I understand more than you think. And after today, you will never hold power over me again." The words hung heavy between us. His shoulders sagged, his fury losing air like a punctured tire. For the first time, he looked small to me, small and ordinary, stripped of the grand illusions I had once wrapped him in. I turned away, not to escape, but because there was nothing left in his face I needed to see. The choice had already been made. That night, as the house finally quieted, I began to plan not for his future, but for mine. Within a month, the house was no longer mine. I signed the papers without hesitation. The walls that had carried both love and betrayal, passing to strangers who would never know the weight they once held. I packed only what I wanted, leaving behind the relics of a life that had been built on sacrifice and cracked by deceit. My new home was smaller, perched near the Virginia coast, its windows open to the salt air. The first night I slept there, I didn't dream of Damien or the shadows of his plans. I dreamt of the ocean, endless and untouchable, with Marianne's guidance. I placed my finances where no one, not even blood, could reach them. Each signature, each transfer, was a thread severed, not of family, but of chains I had mistaken for love. At dusk, I walked the shoreline, the sky painted in streaks of rose and gold. The tide whispered at my feet, steady and sure. The box under the stairs had revealed more than my son's betrayal. It had shown me my own strength, buried deep but waiting. For years, I had lived as though my worth depended on others, on a husband who left, on a son who tried to erase me. Now, I lived for myself. I stood there until the last light faded, the waves erasing footprints behind me, and I felt, at last, the quiet joy of a life that belonged only to me.